My name is Robin Grimes. I'm 31 years old, and I'm writing this from my apartment on Christmas night, not where I was supposed to be. I should have been at my boyfriend's parents' house, sitting at an overstuffed table pretending to enjoy pie, while his uncle played the accordion like he did every single year. Instead, I'm alone, shoes still on coat, draped over a chair, staring at my phone like it might explain how 5 years of my life ended between the mashed potatoes and the eggnog. It started like most disasters do, with a question that everyone thought was harmless. When are you two finally getting engaged? I was cornered in the kitchen by 3 of his aunts while refilling my wine glass. They weren't smiling. They never were when this topic came up. One blocked the doorway, another folded her arms, and the third tilted her head with that practiced look of concern that always felt more like judgment. She's been waiting long enough, the oldest aunt said. 5 years is plenty of time, the second added. What's the holdup? The third asked flatly. I'd heard variations of this question at least 60 times over the years. Birthdays, holidays, random Sundays. Every gathering came with an interrogation, and every time I smiled, every time I softened it, we're happy. We're taking things slow, when the time is right. What I never said was the truth. Across the room, Walter Avila. My boyfriend of 5 years was laughing with his cousins, completely unaware that once again I was being positioned as the woman afraid of commitment, the one dragging her feet, the one wasting their precious boy's time. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was Christmas. Maybe it was the memory of every proposal I'd swallowed quietly so he wouldn't have to answer for them. But when the oldest aunt crossed her arms and said, "Honestly, Robin, don't you love him enough to move forward?" I heard my own voice answer before I could stop it. That's a great question. They blinked, surprised I wasn't deflecting. I've actually proposed 3 times, I said calmly. Walter said no, every time. Silence slammed into the room. I kept going because once the truth started, it demanded to be finished. First time was 2 years in. Second was on his birthday last year. Third was 8 months ago. He asked me not to tell anyone because he said it was embarrassing. The music in the living room stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. I realized too late that my voice had carried. Walter appeared in the doorway, confusion already shifting into panic. What's going on? All 3 aunts turned to him. You said no one asked slowly. 3 times. The color drained from his face. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him, like I'd broken a rule he never should have been allowed to write in the first place. That's not, he started. She's exaggerating. I have the receipts, I said quietly. And the texts where you asked me not to give up on you. That was the moment I knew Christmas was over. I didn't wait for his mother to arrive, or for explanations to spiral. I went to the bedroom, grabbed my coat, and when Walter followed me crying, whispering that we could talk privately, I shook my head. We already did, I said. 3 times. And for the first time in 5 years, I chose myself. I didn't go home right away after I walked out. I sat in my car in the driveway engine, off hands, still on the steering wheel, listening to muffled laughter and music leaking through the walls of a house I'd spent 5 years trying to belong to. My phone buzzed once, then again. Walter's name lit up the screen over and over. I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I already knew what he would say. He would tell me I blindsided him, that I embarrassed him, that I should have protected him better, and I couldn't carry that weight anymore. 5 years earlier, I would have apologized first. I would have explained myself. I would have tried to soften the truth until it fit neatly into his comfort. That version of me didn't exist anymore. I met Walter at a mutual friend's barbecue. It was ordinary in the best way. Plastic chairs, cheap beer smoke, drifting from an overworked grill. We talked for hours, like we'd known each other longer than a single afternoon. He was charming without trying too hard, thoughtful, in a way that felt sincere and attentive, in a way that made me feel seen. When he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. When he texted the next morning, neither did I. We moved in together after 18 months. Nothing dramatic, just a natural next step. We split rent unevenly because I earned more, furnished the apartment together, learned each other's rhythms. I thought we were building something steady, something real. When his family welcomed me with open arms, at first I took it as a good sign. I showed up. Every holiday, every birthday. I brought wine, helped set up folding tables, listened politely to the same stories year after year. I didn't just date Walter, I dated his entire family. The first proposal happened 2 years in. I'd spent 4 months saving quietly, cutting back on everything unnecessary. I bought a ring that felt like him, understated, elegant, not flashy. I made a reservation at his favorite restaurant, rehearsed what I would say, felt my heart pounding so hard I thought it might actually give me away before I even knelt down. When I asked him, his eyes filled with tears. He said he loved me. He hugged me so tightly I thought he might say yes, just from the force of it. But he didn't. "I'm not ready," he said softly. "I just need more time." I was crushed, but I believed him. We were still young. Love wasn't a deadline, I told myself. I swallowed. The disappointment returned the ring and told myself patience was a virtue. The second proposal was a year later on his birthday. I'd upgraded the ring, traded in the first one, added more savings. I rented a cabin for the weekend, lit candles, cooked dinner myself because I wanted it to feel intimate. He cried again, said all the right things, and then said no again. "I love you so much," he whispered. "I just don't feel like we're there yet." I remember staring at him, nodding, telling him I understood, while something inside me quietly fractured. Still, I stayed. I told myself love meant giving people space to grow. The third proposal wasn't dramatic. No ring, no trip, just us on the couch. One quiet night, the kind where the world feels far away, I looked at him and said, "I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" He didn't cry that time. He just looked sad. "I can't," he said. "Not yet. Please don't give up on us." That was 8 months ago. 8 months of holidays and gatherings where his family treated me like I was the one dragging my feet, like I was afraid of commitment, like I was wasting his time. And every single time I let it happen, because he asked me to. "Don't tell anyone," he'd said after each rejection. "They'll make it weird." So I made myself small. I lied by omission. I let his aunts corner me. Let his parents look at me with thinly veiled disappointment. Let strangers ask when I was finally going to make an honest man out of him. I became the villain in a story where I had been the only one willing to commit. And standing in that kitchen on Christmas Eve with his family demanding answers, something inside me finally refused to bend. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot that night, my phone showed 32 missed messages. I turned it face down and went inside. I poured a glass of water, sat on the edge of the bed, and felt the weight of 5 years settle into a single, undeniable truth. I hadn't lost him that night. I'd lost myself long before. I slept maybe 2 hours that night, if you could even call it sleep. My mind kept replaying the moment Walter's face went pale in the kitchen, the way his first instinct wasn't guilt or accountability, but fear. Fear of being exposed. When morning finally came, it didn't feel like Christmas. It felt like the aftermath of something that had been breaking for a long time. My phone was still face down when I woke up. 32 missed messages had turned into 48. Most from Walter, a few from his mother, one from his father. I read his father's first. "Robin, I don't know what happened last night, but I'm sorry things escalated the way they did. I hope you're okay." That message hit harder than all the others combined. No accusation, no demand, just concern. I stared at it for a long time before putting the phone back down. Walter's messages were all over the place. "I can't believe you did that to me. You humiliated me in front of my entire family. I was going to say yes. You ruined everything. Please call me. We need to talk. I love you. This can't be how it ends." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something I'd been refusing to see every time things got uncomfortable. Walter retreated into intention. I was going to. I planned to. I meant to. Meanwhile, I was living in action. I was the one proposing, the one waiting, the one absorbing the fallout. By noon, his mother added me to a group text with several of his relatives. I should have left immediately. I didn't. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. "We need to have a calm, adult conversation about what happened," she wrote. "Whatever issues you two had should not have been aired in front of the family." I took a breath before responding. With respect, I typed, "Your family has been questioning my commitment publicly for 5 years. I handled it privately until I couldn't anymore." One of his aunts replied almost instantly, "We were just looking out for him. We didn't know." "You didn't know because Walter asked me to keep quiet," I wrote. "I'm not the villain here." The word apologize appeared more times than I could count. Apologize for embarrassing him. Apologize for causing a scene. Apologize for telling the truth at the wrong time. I left the group chat and blocked his mother's number. That's when the flying monkeys arrived. His best friend texted me asking me to please talk to him because he was a mess. A cousin I actually liked said Walter wasn't eating, that he was spiraling. His brother, a man who'd barely spoken to me in 5 years, accused me of ambushing Walter and pressuring him into marriage. I made one mistake, I replied to his brother. What's his side exactly, I asked. He said Walter felt trapped, that I'd been pushing him for years, that I should have waited. I stared at the screen, stunned by how easily the narrative flipped. I replied once more calmly with facts. 3 proposals, 3 rejections, years of silence to protect him. He never responded. On the 3rd day, Walter showed up at my apartment. I wasn't going to open the door. I swear I wasn't. But he started knocking louder, and then the neighbors' doors opened, and I didn't want a scene. I cracked the door open with the chain still on. He looked wrecked. Red eyes, unwashed hair, wearing the same sweater from Christmas. Can I come in? He asked. Please. We can talk like this, I said. He called me cold. Said he couldn't believe I'd shut him out after 5 years. I reminded him quietly that he'd shut me out 3 times when it mattered most. That's when he finally said it. I was scared, he admitted. My parents' marriage is a disaster. I didn't want us to become that. I waited for the part where he explained why he never told me that. Why he let me keep proposing anyway. Why he let his family blame me. It never came. Instead, he said I didn't want to lose you. And that was the moment I realized the truth. He wasn't afraid of marriage. He was afraid of losing the comfort of having me without committing to me. When I told him I was done, really done, his tone changed. He asked about the apartment, the lease, the furniture, the life we'd built. I told him I'd buy out my portion, that he could stay. He said he couldn't afford it alone. That's not my problem anymore, I said. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me, like I'd become someone else overnight. But I hadn't changed. I just stopped abandoning myself. Once Walter realized tears weren't going to pull me back in, he tried something else. Control dressed up as practicality. What about the lease, he asked, standing in the hallway, with his hands shoved into his pockets like he was the reasonable one now. We just renewed it in September. 8 months left. You can't just walk away from that. I'm not walking away, I said. I'll buy out my portion. His jaw tightened. You know I can't afford this place alone. That sentence had saved him more times than I could count over the years. It was always my problem when something became inconvenient. His fear, his timing, his finances. I'd been cushioning his landing for 5 years, and he'd grown used to the idea that I always would. That sounds like something you'll need to figure out, I said evenly. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. This isn't the woman I fell in love with, he whispered. I almost laughed. Almost. The woman he fell in love with proposed 3 times and accepted being told no. She covered for him. She absorbed blame. She shrank. Of course he didn't recognize me anymore. After he left, I emailed the landlord, explained the situation calmly, professionally, asked what my options were. The response came back the next morning. Painful but clear. I could surrender my portion of the lease without Walter's signature. It would cost me about $6,400. It hurt to read that number. It hurt worse to realize I was willing to pay it just to be free. When Walter found out I'd started the process without him, he lost it. He showed up at my office. Not texted, not called, showed up during work hours. I was in a meeting when security called my desk. There's a man in the lobby asking for you. He's very upset. By the time I got downstairs, he was pacing, voice raised, eyes wild, talking about how I was abandoning him, how I was ruining his life. People stared. Someone whispered. Security escorted him out. My manager pulled me aside afterward, concern etched across her face. Everything okay at home? Breaking up with my boyfriend of 5 years, I said quietly. She nodded. Let me know if this becomes a pattern. We'll involve HR. That was the moment it really hit me. His refusal to accept no was now threatening my job. The same man who said he just needed time had no respect for my boundaries once I stopped waiting. Then came the spreadsheet. An actual spreadsheet emailed late one night, itemized. Every piece of furniture we'd bought together. Kitchenware, lamps, even gifts his parents had given us. At the bottom, $3,200 owed. I stared at it in disbelief. I replied with one sentence. I'll take the TV and couch since I paid for them. You can keep everything else. We're even. His response came fast. You always were cheap. Cheap. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, letting that word hang in the air. Cheap after 3 engagement rings. After paying 60% of the rent because he made less. After years of emotional labor that never showed up on a spreadsheet. I didn't reply. By then, the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't grief. This was entitlement. He wasn't mourning the loss of me. He was furious that the rules had changed without his permission. I moved my essentials into a friend's spare room that weekend, left most of the furniture behind. It wasn't worth the fight. Let him keep the couch. I was keeping my self-respect. The lease paperwork moved forward. Slowly. Painfully. But forward. And for the first time since Christmas, I noticed something strange. I could breathe. The lease situation dragged on longer than it needed to, mostly because Walter refused to cooperate. He ignored emails from the landlord, delayed signatures, and sent me long messages about how unfair I was being. Every delay felt intentional, like he believed inconvenience might wear me down enough to make me come back. It didn't. The landlord eventually gave us both an ultimatum: resolve it or face eviction proceedings that would damage both our rental histories. Only then did Walter finally sign. Not quietly, not without commentary. He sent me a 3-page email first. 3 pages detailing how I'd ruined his life, how I'd stolen his future, how I'd proven he was right not to marry someone so cold and vindictive. 3 pages of blame, victimhood, and self-pity. Not a single sentence acknowledging his role in any of it. I didn't respond. Around that time, the pressure from his family suddenly stopped. No more texts, no more indirect messages through friends, no more guilt-laced concern disguised as advice. I heard later through my friend, who still talked to one of his cousins, why. Apparently his grandmother had spoken up. She proposed 3 times, she'd said. He said no 3 times. That's not her fault. That's his. Stop embarrassing yourselves. I'd never met her grandmother more than a handful of times, but in that moment she felt like an unexpected ally. Someone in that family finally said out loud what I'd been living quietly for years. The workplace incident wasn't the last time Walter tried to cross a line. He showed up again a week later, this time trying to enter through the parking garage. Building security recognized his car and stopped him before he could get inside. I filed an incident report. I didn't ask for a restraining order. I didn't think he was dangerous, just desperate. But I needed a paper trail. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining how far he was willing to go once he lost control. My own family found out around then. His mother had called my mother, telling her I'd humiliated Walter and destroyed a 5-year relationship over hurt feelings. My mom asked one question. Did he reject her proposals 3 times? There was silence on the other end. Well, then my mother said, it sounds like he destroyed it. She called me immediately after. She wasn't angry. She was furious at him. Robin, she said, you stayed too long. That's not love. That's endurance. Hearing that from someone who knew me better than anyone felt like a release, like permission to stop questioning myself. Financially, the damage was real. Between breaking the lease, losing deposits, and moving costs, I was down almost $5,000. It stung. But every time I felt tempted to regret it, I reminded myself what staying would have cost me instead. My peace, my dignity, my future. By the end of the 2nd week, I'd stopped responding to everyone in Walter's orbit. No more explanations. No more defending my choices. Anyone who still believed his version of events wasn't actually interested in the truth. And that clarity, as painful as it was, felt like progress. 3 weeks after Christmas, everything finally went quiet. The lease was resolved. The apartment was no longer my responsibility. The furniture was no longer my problem. The shared life we'd built over 5 years had been dismantled into paperwork, emails, and a handful of boxes in my friend's spare room. It wasn't the clean ending I once imagined, but it was an ending. Walter sent one last message after the 2nd office incident. I hope you're happy, he wrote. You've turned everyone against me. My family thinks I'm a liar. My friends don't know what to believe. You could have handled this quietly, and instead you chose to destroy me. I'll never forgive you. I read it twice before replying. I proposed 3 times. You said no 3 times. I kept quiet to protect you. Your family cornered me and demanded answers. I told the truth. Everything that happened after that is a consequence of your choices, not mine. I didn't destroy you. Your fear of commitment and your inability to be honest did. Please don't contact me again. Then I blocked his number, everywhere, for real this time. A week later, one of his friends reached out. Different tone, softer. She told me Walter had started therapy, that he understood now how badly he'd handled things. He wasn't asking me to take him back. He just wanted to apologize in person, for closure. I thought about it longer than I expected to. Part of me wanted to hear it, wanted to see him take responsibility, wanted proof that the last 5 years hadn't been built entirely on self-deception. But another part of me knew something important. An apology wouldn't give me back the years I spent waiting. It wouldn't erase 3 rejections. It wouldn't undo the way I learned to make myself smaller just to keep someone who never fully chose me. So I declined. I wish him well in therapy, I wrote back, but I don't need his apology for closure. I found that when I walked out on Christmas. She never responded. I found a new apartment shortly after. A small one-bedroom. Nothing fancy. But it's mine. No shared closets. No ghosts of proposals past. The financial hit still hurts. It'll take a few months to rebuild my savings. But I wake up without dread now. Without wondering if today will finally be the day someone decides I'm enough. My therapist said something during our third session that changed everything. You spent 5 years waiting for someone to choose you while they actively chose uncertainty, she said. That's not patience. That's self-abandonment. Self-abandonment. I did that. Every time I proposed again after being rejected. Every time I smiled through his family's questions. Every time I defended him instead of myself. I'm not angry at Walter anymore. He was afraid, and he handled that fear poorly. But fear doesn't excuse keeping someone in limbo for 5 years. It doesn't excuse letting others take the blame for your indecision. Last week, his father sent me a short message. I'm sorry my family put you in that position. You deserve better. I hope you find someone who doesn't make you wait. I didn't reply, but I appreciated it. So that's where I am now, a 5-year relationship behind me. 3 proposals, 1 very public ending, and finally some peace. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: someone who wants to be with you will show you. Not with promises of someday or when I'm ready, but with action. If you're always the one proposing and they're always the one postponing, that is your answer. I wish I'd trusted mine sooner. My name is Linda Wallace, and I was 27 years old when I finally understood that patience, when stretched too far, doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. For 2 years, I thought I was in a solid, grounded relationship, the kind that grows quietly without fireworks, but with consistency. My boyfriend, Charles Wright, was 26 when we met through a shared hobby group. One of those casual social spaces where conversations start light and accidentally turn meaningful. We clicked immediately, not in a dramatic way, but in the way that felt sustainable. Long talks after meetings, shared jokes, similar values. After a year moving in together, felt like a natural next step, not a leap. I truly believed we were building something stable. That belief didn't crack all at once. It eroded slowly, almost politely, through someone who insisted she was never the problem. Charles's best friend, Rachel Monroe, had been in his life since college. They were roommates during sophomore year, stayed close after graduation, and by the time I met her, she was already woven into his family gatherings, friend group, and routines. At first, she was perfectly cordial. Friendly, even. She smiled at me, asked questions, complimented my cooking the first time she came over. Then, about 6 months into Charles and me dating, something shifted. It wasn't loud at first. It never is. It came disguised as humor, as concern, as just being honest. Little comments about my job. I'm a graphic designer at a mid-size agency, a career I've worked hard for and genuinely love. Oh, still doing the creative thing, she'd say, even after Charles proudly told everyone about my promotion. When I talked about a project I was excited about, she'd tilt her head and smile thinly. That's cute. Charles would brush it off. That's just Rachel's sarcasm. Don't take it personally. And because I didn't want to be the insecure girlfriend, I didn't push back. I told myself it was harmless. But it escalated. She started forgetting to include me in group plans. She'd show up at our apartment unannounced and act surprised that I was home like I was a guest in my own life. She'd casually mention how Charles used to date women who were more ambitious, more driven, more financially impressive. Always framed as nostalgia, never as comparison, except that it always felt like comparison. I swallowed it over and over again. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago at Charles's birthday dinner. It was supposed to be small and easy. Just his parents, his sister Rachel, and a few close friends from college I'd grown to know. We were at a nice restaurant, the kind where the lighting is warm enough to soften tension, where conversations flow easily over shared plates and wine, until Rachel decided to stop pretending. So she said suddenly, voice loud enough for the entire table, "When are you finally going to get a real career?" I looked up from my menu, genuinely surprised by the audacity. I do have a career. I'm a senior designer at... Yeah, she cut in smiling. But when are you going to do something that actually matters? Charles works in finance, makes 6 figures. That's a real career. Charles touched my arm. Hey, that's not cool. She waved him off. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You deserve someone on your level, someone who can actually provide. The table went silent. His mother looked uncomfortable. His sister stared down at her plate. I felt my jaw tighten, but something inside me didn't snap into anger. It snapped into clarity. That's your opinion, I said calmly. Rachel leaned back, smirking. It's not an opinion. It's a fact. You're not good enough for him. He deserves better. Something in the air changed. Then he can date you, I said evenly. Oh, wait. He already turned you down. Twice. Her face drained of color, then flushed red. What are you talking about? She snapped. I turned to Charles. She asked you out sophomore year and again right after graduation. Right. Every head at the table turned toward him. Charles froze, color rising in his cheeks. Linda, you told me 6 months ago. I continued still calm when we were talking about how we met. You said she tried to make it romantic, but you only ever saw her as a friend. Rachel stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. That was different. Different how? I asked. Different because after 2 rejections, you decided that if you couldn't have him, you'd make sure anyone he dated felt inadequate. Charles's father made a noise that might have been a suppressed laugh. Charles stared at Rachel, something breaking behind his eyes. Is that what this has been about? All the comments. The attitude toward Linda. I was looking out for you, Rachel insisted. She's not good enough. You need someone who... Rachel, his sister cut in sharply. He said no. Twice. Move on. She looked around this table. No one was defending her. His mother's disappointment was unmistakable. His friends suddenly found their drinks fascinating. You know what Rachel said, grabbing her jacket? Fine. When this relationship crashes and burns, don't come crying to me. She stormed out, leaving her credit card on the table to cover her portion of the bill, a detail that would have been funny if it hadn't been so revealing. The dinner limped on after that, awkward and strained. Charles kept apologizing. His parents were overly kind to me, like they were trying to make up for something they hadn't known they owed. We got home around 11. The apartment felt too quiet. I'm sorry, Charles said finally. I didn't realize. I thought she was just being protective. I sat down slowly on the couch. Did you know she was talking about me to other people? He froze, and that hesitation told me everything. What kind of things? I asked. He swallowed. That you were holding me back. That you weren't serious about your career, about us. And you never told me, I said softly. I thought she'd get over it, he whispered. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just about jealousy. It was about control, and it was only just beginning. The days after Charles's birthday didn't bring relief. They brought a strange, heavy quiet, the kind that presses on your chest because you know something unresolved is still moving beneath the surface. For the first 24 hours, Rachel disappeared completely. No texts. No calls, no passive-aggressive social media posts. I almost believed briefly that the confrontation had finally forced her to retreat with dignity. That illusion shattered the next afternoon when Charles showed me his phone, his expression tight and conflicted. She'd sent him a long message, paragraphs and paragraphs. Apologies wrapped in justification, remorse, tangled with blame. She said she'd come on too strong, that she was just trying to protect him, that she valued their friendship too much to let someone else ruin it. She said emotions had gotten the better of her. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. She never once mentioned me by name. She didn't apologize to you, I said quietly after reading it. She apologized to you about me like I'm not even a person in this situation. Charles stared at the screen for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing through something bitter. Then, without a word, he blocked her number. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning. Within days, Charles started getting messages from friends he hadn't heard from in months. Casual check-ins that weren't casual at all. Hey, just wanted to make sure everything's okay. You good? Heard some stuff, wanted your side. The first screenshot arrived from one of his college friends late one night. Then another. Then 5 more. Group chat messages. Months worth. Rachel had been talking about me behind our backs for almost a year. She called me controlling because I didn't want to socialize with someone who openly disrespected me. She said I was isolating Charles because we spent time together like couples do. She claimed I was financially dependent on him, despite the fact that we split rent and expenses evenly, and framed it as her concern for his future. Charles read through the screenshots in silence, his face slowly draining of color. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were glassy. I can't believe I let this happen, he said hoarsely. I should have shut it down the first time. What hurts isn't that she did it, I replied, choosing my words carefully. It's that she felt comfortable doing it for so long. He nodded, and for the first time since the birthday dinner, I saw something shift in him. Not defensiveness, not guilt alone, but resolve. Rachel didn't take being blocked well. She started showing up. At first, it was places we frequented often enough that coincidence felt plausible. The coffee shop we went to every Sunday morning. The farmer's market we loved on Saturdays. Each time she'd act startled to see us, then immediately focus all her attention on Charles, speaking quickly, emotionally, like I wasn't standing right there. We need to talk, she said one morning, voice shaking. No, we don't, Charles replied. You've said enough. You're really going to throw away 8 years of friendship over her, she asked, eyes flicking to me, like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. Charles didn't hesitate. I'm throwing away a friendship with someone who lied about my partner for months. That's not friendship. For the first time, she looked directly at me, really looked at me. The hostility wasn't hidden anymore. It was raw, unmistakable. This is your fault, she said. No, I answered calmly. This is the result of your choices. She stepped closer, voice dropping. You think you've won. Charles moved between us instinctively. Rachel, stop. Leave us alone. Or what she challenged. Or I'll get a restraining order, he said. I'm serious. This is harassment. She left, but the look she gave us promised this wasn't over. 2 days later, Charles got a call from his supervisor. Someone had sent an anonymous email to his company claiming he was misusing company resources and engaging in inappropriate workplace behavior. None of it was true. HR investigated anyway. Interviews, emails, documentation, stress layered on stress. Then my phone started lighting up. Fake social media profiles, generic names, no photos, messages that felt designed to hit emotional pressure points. He's cheating on you. You don't know what he says about you. You're being used. I blocked them. More appeared. That's when Charles's sister told us something that reframed everything. She came over one evening, sat across from us at the kitchen table, and said quietly, she tried to kiss him last year, at my birthday, before you two went public. Charles's face went slack. What he whispered. You don't remember, she continued gently. You'd been drinking. She kept trying to get you alone. I stayed close because something felt off. When you went to the bathroom, she told me she was going to make her move that night. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The bitterness, the escalation, the obsession disguised as concern. Charles looked at me, eyes full of disbelief and shame. What do we do? I took a slow breath. We document everything. Because whatever this was becoming, I knew one thing with certainty. People like Rachel don't stop when they lose control. They escalate. Once we started paying attention, it became impossible to ignore how long Rachel had been poisoning the ground around us. Documentation came easily, not because we were obsessive, but because she was careless. Screenshots multiplied. Old messages resurfaced. Friends who had stayed silent began reaching out, their tone cautious, almost embarrassed, as if they were unsure whether they were allowed to question the version of events they'd been fed for months. One of Charles's former college friends forwarded an entire thread from a group chat I'd never been part of. Reading it felt like stepping into a distorted mirror version of my life. Rachel had painted me as manipulative, emotionally unstable, quietly abusive. She claimed I discouraged Charles from seeing his friends, that I monitored his time, that I pressured him about money. None of it was true, but the repetition made it convincing to people who didn't know me well enough to question it. What hurt most wasn't the lies themselves. It was how easily they'd been accepted. Charles scrolled through the messages with his head in his hands. Why didn't anyone say something? Because she framed it as concern, I said. Concern is persuasive. Rachel's language was careful. She never sounded angry. She sounded worried. She used phrases like, I'm scared for him, and I just want what's best. She positioned herself as the reasonable one, the long-suffering friend trying to save someone who didn't know he needed saving. By the end of the week, the damage was visible. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations felt strained. Friends we used to laugh with now watched me like I might explode at any moment. Charles was furious at Rachel, at himself, at the people who had believed her without question. But anger wasn't what scared me. It was how calculated she'd been. When blocking her number didn't work, she tried new tactics. Emails from unfamiliar addresses, messages routed through mutual acquaintances, comments dropped casually into conversations designed to sound harmless, but land sharp. I hope he's not isolating you. You know you can always stay with me if things get bad. Things weren't bad, but she was determined to make them look that way. The first time I realized she might cross into something worse was when Charles and I ran into her in the lobby of our apartment building. She was waiting. Not passing through, not coincidentally arriving, waiting. I just want to talk, she said, stepping toward him, ignoring me entirely. There's nothing left to say, Charles replied, his voice steady but cold. She leaned closer, eyes flicking past me like I didn't exist. You don't even know what she's doing behind your back. That night, I found another fake profile message waiting in my inbox. This one detailed, specific, designed to hurt. It mentioned things only someone close to Charles would know, places we went, conversations we'd had, private insecurities. I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't jealousy anymore. This was fixation. Charles's sister came over again the following weekend, bringing more screenshots. Friends had finally started pushing back, questioning Rachel's stories, asking why she seemed more invested in destroying our relationship than supporting Charles's happiness. Rachel didn't handle that well. She'd apparently lost it during a confrontation, yelling about how she'd been there through everything and how she deserved more loyalty. Someone recorded it. The audio circulated quietly. The tone was revealing. No concern, no care, just entitlement. That recording marked the beginning of the end for her social credibility. But it also marked something else. Desperation. And desperation makes people dangerous. Charles asked me that night, voice low, almost afraid, "Do you think she'll stop?" I shook my head, not on her own. Because people who believe they're entitled to someone's life don't accept rejection as an answer. They see it as a challenge. The shift from uncomfortable to frightening didn't happen in a dramatic burst. It crept in quietly through small violations that piled up until they could no longer be explained away. Rachel stopped pretending her appearances were accidental. She showed up with intention, now timing her arrivals so that Charles would be alone for just a moment or so, she thought. Once she waited near his office building at the end of the workday. Another time she lingered outside the gym he went to after work, leaning against her car like she belonged there. Each encounter followed the same pattern. She spoke only to him as if I were invisible, as if erasing me might somehow make me disappear from his life. Charles stopped being polite. He didn't raise his voice, didn't insult her, didn't engage beyond what was necessary, but his boundaries were firm. "You need to stop," he told her more than once. "This is inappropriate. You're making me uncomfortable." Each time she reacted the same way, wounded, indignant, as though he were betraying her by refusing to play his assigned role. She reframed his rejection as my manipulation. According to her, I was controlling him, isolating him, poisoning him against her. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so exhausting. I hadn't told Charles to cut her off. I hadn't demanded anything. All I'd done was exist, and that was enough to make me the villain in her story. The first real jolt of fear came 2 days later. Charles got a call from his supervisor in the middle of the afternoon. Someone had sent an anonymous email to the company accusing him of misusing company resources and engaging in inappropriate professional behavior. The claims were vague, but damaging enough to trigger a formal HR inquiry. He had to sit in a conference room answering questions that felt surreal, defending his integrity against accusations that made no sense. There was no proof. There never was. The investigation closed quickly, but the humiliation lingered. That night, Charles sat on the edge of our bed staring at the floor. "She's trying to ruin us," he said quietly. Not angry, not dramatic, just factual. My phone buzzed as if to confirm it. Another fake account. Another message. This one more aggressive. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're dealing with." I stared at the screen, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. This wasn't someone blowing off steam. This was someone escalating. The final piece clicked into place over dinner with Charles's sister a few nights later. She hesitated before speaking, like she wasn't sure if she should say anything at all. "There's something else," she said finally. "Last year, before you and Charles were public, Rachel tried to kiss him." Charles's head snapped up. "What?" "You don't remember," she said gently. "You'd been drinking at my birthday party. She kept trying to get you alone. I stayed close because something felt wrong. When you went to the bathroom, she told me she was going to make her move that night. I didn't leave your side after that." The room went quiet. Suddenly, the timeline made sense. The sudden shift in behavior, the hostility that bloomed the moment Charles and I became official. The possessiveness masked as loyalty. She hadn't lost a friend. She'd lost control over a narrative she'd been rehearsing in her head for years. "What do we do?" Charles asked me later that night. I didn't answer right away. I was too busy thinking about patterns, about how every escalation had followed a boundary she didn't like, blocking her, confronting her, ignoring her. Each step forward for us had been met with retaliation from her. We document everything I said finally. Every message, every appearance, every fake account. We stop assuming she'll calm down on her own. Charles nodded. "And if that's not enough, then we protect ourselves," I said. "Legally, if we have to." I didn't say what I was really thinking, that people who feel entitled don't stop when asked. They stop when consequences finally outweigh obsession. And I had a sinking feeling we hadn't reached that point yet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded cleanly inside an official-looking envelope, the kind that immediately makes your stomach drop before you've even read a word. Charles was still at work when I opened it. Final notice. Debt collection. I read the amount twice before it registered. $4,300. A credit card balance. Past due. My name printed neatly at the top. I laughed at first, a sharp, disbelieving sound that echoed in the quiet apartment. I didn't own a credit card with that bank. I never had. I'd always been careful with my finances, almost obsessively so. But the more I read, the colder my hands became. The account had been opened 6 months earlier. The purchases were detailed below. Restaurants Rachel had recommended. A clothing store she'd insisted I had to check out. A gym membership, the same gym she went to every morning. When Charles got home, I handed him the letter without saying a word. He read it slowly, then looked up at me, his face pale. "This isn't possible," he said. "It is," I replied, "and it's not an accident." The credit card company confirmed it within an hour. Fraud. Someone had opened the account using my personal information, my full name, birth date, social security number. Information Rachel had access to back when she and I were friendly enough to swap paperwork at gatherings when she'd been in Charles's life so long that no one questioned her presence. We filed a police report that same night. The detective listened carefully as we explained the history, the harassment, the anonymous emails, the fake profiles. When I mentioned Rachel had been my boyfriend's best friend for years, his pen paused mid-scratch. "Roommates at any point?" he asked. "College," Charles said. "Shared lease, shared documents." The detective nodded slowly. "That's enough access." 2 days later, Rachel showed up at our apartment building. She buzzed the intercom repeatedly until Charles finally answered. Her voice came through shaky and breathless, rehearsed desperation barely concealed. "The police called me," she said, "about a credit card." "This is insane. I would never do something like that." "You had my information," I said flatly. "You knew everything you needed." "That's coincidence," she insisted. "Is it?" Charles asked. "The emails to our jobs. The fake accounts. Showing up everywhere we go." "I was trying to protect you," she said again, clinging to the same lie like a life raft. "The only mistake I made," Charles replied quietly, "was not cutting you off the first time you crossed a line." She went silent. "You don't love me," I added, surprising even myself with how steady my voice was. "You love the version of me you imagined you deserved. If you cared about my happiness, you'd let me be happy." "You're being manipulated," she shot back. "She turned you against me." "No," Charles said firmly. "Your behavior did." "We have footage," I continued. "You're on camera outside our building after we told you to leave. Multiple times." She swore under her breath, then disconnected. The call from the detective came the next day. The IP address used to open the account traced back to Rachel's home. A warrant followed. Then an arrest. When they searched her apartment, they found more than we'd expected. A folder on her computer labeled with my name, filled with screenshots of my social media going back years. Draft emails she'd never sent, some love confessions, others furious rants. A burner phone linked to the fake accounts. Receipts from a private investigator she'd hired to look into me, hoping to uncover something, anything that justified her obsession. She took a plea deal. Probation. Mandatory counseling. Restitution. A 5-year restraining order. No jail time, at least not yet. 2 months after Charles's birthday, the chaos finally slowed enough for us to breathe. His friend group had fractured apologies trickling in from people who admitted they should have questioned her sooner. His parents were gentle, supportive, remorseful, in quiet ways. We weren't untouched by it. We argued. We unpacked resentment and guilt. We went to counseling not because we were broken, but because we refused to let someone else's obsession define our future. Last week, Charles sat beside me on the couch, our cat curled between us, and said softly, "I'm glad you didn't give up on us." I looked at him, thinking about how close everything had come to collapsing. "You trusted me to choose my own life," I replied. "That's the difference." Rachel violated her probation days later by creating another account, posting vague messages about betrayal and soulmates. She's serving 60 days now. As for us, we're still here, still steady, still choosing each other. And for the first time in months, the quiet feels peaceful. The strangest thing about the silence after chaos is how loud it feels at first. When Rachel was finally removed from our lives, not just emotionally, but legally, there was no dramatic sense of victory, no rush of satisfaction. What settled over us instead was exhaustion followed closely by grief for something that had never truly existed in the way Charles once believed it had. The legal aftermath dragged on quietly in the background. Court dates we didn't attend, paperwork we signed, updates from the detective that felt unreal, even when we'd lived every step of the escalation ourselves. Rachel's plea deal was finalized. Probation mandatory counseling restitution for the fraudulent charges, and a 5-year restraining order against both of us. When she violated that probation by creating yet another anonymous account to post about betrayal and the one who was stolen from her, the consequences finally caught up. 60 days in county jail. When Charles told me I expected to feel something sharp, anger, vindication, relief, what I felt instead was a quiet finality. I don't feel bad, he said slowly, like he was testing the words out loud. I feel done. That felt right. The implosion of his friend group was slower, messier, and in some ways harder than the legal fallout. People reached out in waves. Some apologized, sincerely admitting they'd ignored red flags because Rachel had always been part of the furniture. Others offered half apologies, wrapped in excuses, embarrassed they'd believed her version of events for so long. A few disappeared, entirely unwilling to confront their own complicity. Charles's former college roommate, the one who had recorded Rachel's meltdown, became one of our closest friends. She apologized more times than necessary, her guilt heavy and genuine. I thought she was just overprotective, she said one night over drinks in our living room. I didn't realize she was actively trying to destroy you. You stopped her when it mattered, I told her, and I meant it. Charles's family was unwavering. His father pulled me aside during a weekend visit, hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. I owe you an apology, he said. I knew she had feelings for him once. I thought she'd grown out of it. I should have said something when she started disrespecting you. You didn't know it would turn into this, I replied honestly. Still, he said, you handled it better than most people would have. Charles laughed when I told him later. He said most people would have punched her. I thought about it, I admitted. But then she would have won. That was the truth of it. Losing my composure would have turned the story into something it was never meant to be, a rivalry, a fight, a spectacle. What Rachel wanted was conflict. What dismantled her was restraint. Our relationship didn't come out unscathed. We had hard conversations about why Charles hadn't shut things down sooner, about why he'd dismissed my discomfort for so long, about how easy it had been for someone else to insert herself into our relationship unchecked. We went to couples counseling not because we were falling apart, but because we refused to let resentment calcify into something permanent. Charles carried guilt. Deep, heavy guilt for trusting the wrong person for too long. I carried my own for questioning my instincts, for minimizing my hurt to keep the peace. Therapy gave us language for those feelings, space to unpack them without blame. What emerged wasn't perfection. It was clarity. Last night we sat on the couch, our cat stretched between us. The apartment warm and quiet in a way it hadn't been for months. Charles took my hand, absent-mindedly tracing my knuckles. You know what the difference was, he said softly, between you and her. I looked at him. What? You trusted me to make my own choices, he said. She tried to make them for me. That was it. That was always it. Respect versus possession. Love versus entitlement. We've started talking about the future again, carefully, intentionally, not as a reward for surviving something awful, but because we're choosing to move forward without fear dictating our decisions. Charles mentioned next spring casually, like it wasn't a loaded word. His sister has already volunteered to help him pick out a ring with strict instructions not to propose at a group dinner. Enough drama at those, she joked. She's right. Looking back now, it's almost unsettling how obvious the pattern was. Rachel never accepted rejection. She never moved on. She built a fantasy where persistence would eventually be rewarded, where sabotaging everyone else would make her inevitable. When reality refused to cooperate, she escalated from words to lies to harassment to crimes. And she paid for those choices. People ask me sometimes if I feel sorry for her. I don't. I feel sorry for the years Charles lost believing he owed someone access to his life just because of history. I feel sorry for the version of myself that thought enduring disrespect was the same thing as being understanding. I feel sorry for the people who confuse obsession with love. But Rachel, she made her decisions step by step, knowing exactly what she was doing. And now 2 years later, we're still here. She isn't. We're planning our life quietly, building something real, choosing each other without interference, without fear, without anyone standing in the shadows pretending to be an ally. And honestly, that feels like the only ending this story was ever going to have. My name is Irene Marshall, and I was 29 years old when I walked into a Christmas dinner that was never meant to feed me, only to break me. At least that's what it felt like in hindsight. At the time, I still believed in benefit of the doubt. I still believed that if you showed up enough, loved someone consistently enough, and swallowed enough awkward silences, eventually people would meet you halfway. I had been dating Andrew Whitmore for 2 years, 2 solid, deeply real years, and despite the polite smiles and lukewarm hellos, I genuinely thought his family just needed time. Andrew always said they were formal with everyone, that they warmed slowly. I trusted him because he had never given me a reason not to. Andrew came from money, the kind that didn't talk loudly about itself because it didn't have to. His father owned a chain of private investment firms. His mother floated between charity boards and exclusive social clubs like it was a full-time occupation. I came from a quieter world. My parents worked ordinary jobs, taught me to show up on time, keep my word, and treat people decently, whether or not they could do anything for me. Andrew loved that about me, or so he said. He loved that I didn't care about status, that I worked hard, that I laughed easily. I loved him because he was kind in private, steady in chaos, and never once made me feel small. So when his father called me personally on Christmas Eve morning and said, "Irene, we need to talk about your relationship with our son. Come to dinner tonight." Just you, my stomach dropped, but my heart still tried to hope. I told myself this was it, the olive branch. The moment where they finally saw me as permanent instead of temporary. I spent the entire afternoon spiraling between nerves and cautious optimism. I changed outfits 3 times. I debated whether bringing wine would feel presumptuous or respectful. I practiced neutral smiles in the mirror, rehearsed calm responses to imagined questions. I didn't tell Andrew about the call, not because I was hiding it, but because his father had explicitly said, "We'd like this to be a family conversation." I assumed Andrew knew. I assumed wrong. When I arrived at the Whitmore house, the first thing that struck me was how quiet it was. No music, no smell of food, no warmth spilling out into the cold evening air like every Christmas gathering I'd ever known. His mother opened the door with a smile that stopped just short of her eyes. "Andrew isn't here," she said immediately, as if answering a question I hadn't asked yet. "We asked him to stay away tonight." Something in my chest tightened. "This is just a conversation," she added, already turning away, already assuming I would follow. The dining room looked less like a holiday dinner and more like a board meeting. The table was bare, no plates, no decorations, just water glasses placed with surgical precision. His father sat at the head of the table, his mother to his right. Andrew's older sister Victoria sat across from her, arms folded, gaze fixed firmly on the wood grain in front of her. One chair was pulled out for me. "Sit," his father said. I did, and that was the moment I realized too late that this wasn't an invitation. It was a verdict. I remember noticing my hands first. They were folded neatly in my lap. Fingers interlocked, but I could feel the dampness between them, the slight tremor I was trying very hard to control. No one offered me water. No one asked if I was comfortable. The silence stretched long enough that it stopped feeling accidental and started feeling deliberate, like they were waiting for me to shrink under it. Andrew's father cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. Fingers steepled posture, relaxed in a way that felt rehearsed. "Irene," he began, and something about the way he said my name made my skin prickle. Polite, detached, final. "We've been patient. We've observed your relationship with our son very carefully, and we've decided it's time to be honest with you." My heart thudded once hard. "Okay," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. His mother jumped in before he could continue, her tone smooth and almost kind, like someone delivering bad news they believed was for your own good. "Andrew is using you," she said plainly. "He told us himself." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "Using me? How?" Victoria finally lifted her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was cool, precise, sharpened by years of getting her way. "You're what he calls a trophy girlfriend," she said. "Someone pleasant to have on his arm. Attractive, presentable, but not someone he sees a future with." The words didn't land all at once. They hit in pieces like shrapnel. Trophy, girlfriend, not a future. "That's not true," I said automatically. The sentence escaping before my brain could catch up. "Andrew and I..." His father raised a hand, silencing me without touching me. "Please don't embarrass yourself by arguing. We're not saying this to hurt you. Quite the opposite. We actually feel sorry for you." "Sorry for me. You're convenient," his mother continued, leaning forward now. "You help him emotionally. You're available when he needs a +1 for events. You don't make demands. And frankly, She paused, eyes flicking over me in a way that felt like inventory. You're not perceptive enough to realize you're being played. That one burned. Not because it insulted my intelligence, but because it questioned my reality, my judgment, my entire relationship. Victoria exhaled as if bored with the process. He's been seeing someone else, she said. An ex-girlfriend. A woman who actually understands our world. This has been going on for months. The room tilted. My ears rang. I became acutely aware of the absence of Andrew, of the empty space, where his voice should have been, where his reassurance should have lived. Why isn't he here? I asked quietly. His father leaned forward, elbows on the table, because he didn't want to deal with the aftermath. He asked us to handle this. Cleanly. Cleanly. He doesn't know how to end things without you causing a scene, Victoria added. This seemed kinder. Kinder. The word echoed hollowly. I should have stood up. I know that now. I should have walked out the moment they started speaking for him, the moment they stripped him of agency and me of dignity. But shock has a way of freezing you in place. And they were so confident, so specific, so united. Andrew not being there felt like proof all by itself. His father softened his voice, adopting something almost paternal. You seem like a decent woman, Irene. Just not our level. Cut your losses. Walk away now with your pride intact. Find someone more suitable. Someone who works at a cafe or a boutique. Someone who fits. His mother nodded. We'll tell Andrew you ended things. That way no one looks bad. No hard feelings. They sat back then, all three of them waiting for me to accept the narrative they'd written, to thank them, to quietly erase myself from Andrew's life like a temporary inconvenience. My chest felt tight, but something else stirred beneath the panic, something steadier. I'd spent my life solving problems under pressure, staying calm when things went wrong. And as they waited for me to break, a memory surfaced. Small. Seemingly insignificant. 3 weeks earlier, Andrew had gone to brunch with some old friends. He'd come home laughing about how he'd accidentally recorded hours of audio on his phone. 4 hours of nothing, he'd joked. Except it wasn't nothing. I had listened to it later that night, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. And what I'd heard, I'd saved. I lifted my head and met Andrew's father's eyes. Before I respond, I said calmly, surprising even myself, there's something I think you should hear. His expression hardened instantly. What is this? Just listen, I said, and reached for my phone. The sound of my phone clicking felt louder than it should have in that silent room. I noticed Andrew's mother straighten in her chair, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Victoria's jaw set just slightly. His father didn't move at all, only watched me with narrowed eyes, as if he could will whatever I was about to do into harmlessness. I hit play. Andrew's voice filled the space between us, warm and unguarded, in a way I had never once heard him sound around his family. I love her so much, it's honestly embarrassing, he said, laughing softly. I catch myself smiling like an idiot just thinking about her face. Is that crazy? One of his friends responded with a teasing groan, and Andrew laughed again, that easy, familiar sound that lived in my chest. That's disgustingly cute, the friend said. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I stared at the condensation on my water glass as Andrew kept talking. I know my parents hate her, he continued. My mom keeps saying I can do better, whatever that means. My dad actually tried to offer her money to walk away last month. $20,000. Like this is some kind of movie plot. I paused the recording. Slowly, deliberately, I looked up at Andrew's father. 20,000, I asked evenly. That's interesting. You didn't mention that part. His face drained of color. Not all at once, but enough to be unmistakable. Andrew's mother opened her mouth, then closed it again, lips tightening into a thin line. I pressed play. And then Victoria keeps accidentally inviting my ex to family events, Andrew said. She showed up at Thanksgiving and everyone acted like it was totally normal, like I wouldn't notice. Victoria shifted in her seat. This is out of context, she said sharply. I didn't stop it. They keep trying to convince me Irene is using me for my family's money. Andrew went on, frustration edging into his voice. Which is ridiculous. She won't even let me pay for dinner half the time. She paid off her student loans early. She's the most financially responsible person I know. When would she have time to scheme? She works 60-hour weeks. The room felt smaller now, heavier. I stopped the audio and finally met their eyes. There's about 20 more minutes of this, I said quietly. Him defending me, talking about our future, saying he thinks I might be the one. Andrew's father stood up so abruptly his chair scraped harshly against the floor. That proves nothing, he snapped. People say all kinds of things to their friends. It doesn't change reality. Oh, it changes something, I said, because reality includes you trying to buy me off, and it includes you inviting his ex-girlfriend to family holidays behind his back. I turned to Victoria. That was you, wasn't it? Her gaze dropped to the table. I stood then, my legs shaky, but my spine straight. I came here tonight believing maybe you were finally ready to accept me. Instead, you tried to manipulate me into leaving the man I love by lying about his character. Andrew's mother leaned forward, panic bleeding through her composure. You can't tell him about this. Watch me, I said. I walked out without waiting for a response. The cold air hit my face like a reset. I sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, and then I called Andrew. He answered on the second ring. Hey, love. How did it go? Are they being weird? You need to come over, I said. Now. Bring an overnight bag. There was a pause. What happened? I'll explain everything when you get here, I said, my voice softening. But I need you to know something first. I love you, and nothing that happened tonight changes that. He was at my place within the hour. We sat on the couch, knees touching, and I played him the recording. The parts I'd played his family and the parts I hadn't. The bribe, the setup with his ex-girlfriend, the quiet campaign to turn him against me. Andrew didn't speak while it played. When it ended, he covered his face with his hands and exhaled shakily. I suspected, he said finally. I just never had proof. I took his hands. I'm not angry at you. I am, he said hoarsely. At them. And at myself for not stopping it sooner. That night, Andrew made a decision I never asked him to make. He called his father and told him he knew everything. The bribe, the lies, the manipulation. His father's response came through the speaker cold and dismissive. We were doing what's best for you. You'll thank us when you're older. Andrew ended the call. That was Christmas Day. And that was only the beginning. The days after Christmas blurred together in a way that felt both surreal and brutally sharp. Nothing exploded right away. There were no dramatic confrontations, no immediate apologies or ultimatums. Just silence. The kind that hums in your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every breath you take. Andrew stayed with me that night. And the next. And the one after that. It wasn't a formal conversation, no boxes, no declarations. But somewhere between falling asleep on my couch and waking up to him already making coffee in my kitchen, we both understood that this was where he wanted to be. Space, he said. From the noise, from the pressure, from the constant expectation that he would eventually fall back in line. What neither of us expected was how quickly his family would rewrite the story. 2 days after Christmas, Andrew's grandmother called him. She was in her late 80s and sharper than most people half her age, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke and never wasted a question. Apparently, Andrew's parents had called a family emergency meeting and told everyone that I had manipulated him into cutting off contact with them, that I was isolating him from his support system, that I was controlling him. Textbook, Andrew said dryly after he hung up. Classic deflection. His grandmother wanted to hear his side before believing anything. He told her everything about the bribe, the recording, the Thanksgiving ambush with his ex-girlfriend. When he finished, there was a long pause on the line. I always knew your father was a snob, she finally said. Gets it from his mother. Not my finest contribution to the gene pool. I laughed for the first time in days. But the entitlement didn't stop there. 2 days later, Andrew's mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. Andrew wasn't home, he was at work, so she waited, in the parking lot, for nearly 3 hours. When Andrew finally came back to grab some clothes, she cornered him between his car and the stairwell. He recorded the entire interaction without her knowing. Smart man. I listened to it later, my stomach tightening with every word. You've been brainwashed, she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. That woman has turned you against your own family. I heard the recording, Mom, Andrew replied calmly. I know you offered her money to leave. I know you kept inviting my ex around. We did that for you, she snapped. You were making a mistake. She's my choice. That woman is a tradesman's daughter, she said, like it was a diagnosis. Do you know what people say at the club when I tell them my son is dating someone like her? I genuinely don't care, Andrew said. Well, you should, she insisted. Our reputation matters. Your reputation matters. Your children. We don't have children, Andrew cut in. And thank God for that. There was a pause, then she said it. Can you imagine little blue-collar grandchildren running around? The embarrassment alone. That was when Andrew closed the door in her face. I won't pretend that didn't hurt. Hearing someone talk about hypothetical children of mine like they were a stain was a special kind of cruelty. But what stayed with me more than the insult was what Andrew did next. He came back upstairs, sat beside me, and said, "I'm done protecting them from the consequences of their own behavior." That night, he called his sister. She tried to deny everything at first, then pivoted to the familiar line, "I was just looking out for you." "Did you ever consider that I'm an adult who can make my own decisions?" he asked her. Her answer was quiet. "You're not thinking clearly. Love does that." He hung up. By the end of the week, Andrew's entire immediate family had either insulted me, tried to bribe me, or accused me of controlling him. And through all of it, he stood firm, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. Every time they pushed, he chose me again. I started keeping records, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. Recordings, screenshots, dates, times, witnesses. These were people with money influence and no apparent sense of boundaries. I wanted facts on my side. Andrew moved most of his things into my apartment. It wasn't a grand declaration, just a quiet shift of gravity. He said he needed peace. I understood. A few days later, his father left him a voicemail. Andrew played it for me, his jaw tight. "Sweetheart, this has gone on long enough. We're willing to forgive your little rebellion if you come home for Sunday dinner. Alone. We can discuss this like adults. Your mother misses you. Stop being dramatic." Little rebellion. Andrew deleted the message. Something told me they weren't finished. Not even close. If silence was their first tactic, money was their second. It started quietly enough that at first, Andrew didn't even recognize it as an attack. A strange meeting request from his manager. A sudden shift in tone. Conversations that used to be casual becoming stiff, overly formal, like everyone was afraid to say the wrong thing. Andrew had always been good at his job. Reliable. Respected. He'd worked his way up on merit alone, never once leaning on his last name. That independence was something his family had always tolerated, but never truly forgiven. What neither of us had known was that Andrew's father had invested in the company years earlier. Not publicly, not on paper where it was obvious. Just enough influence to whisper into the right ears when he wanted something to move. Andrew came home one evening looking pale, his jacket still on keys, forgotten in his hand. "They put me on notice," he said quietly. "Restructuring. That's what they're calling it." I didn't interrupt. I could hear it already, the careful vagueness, the lack of specifics, the way power disguises itself as procedure. "They wouldn't look at me," he continued. "Finally, my manager admitted my father had called, said my current living situation might be affecting my judgment, suggested some time away could help me refocus." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "He tried to get you fired." Andrew nodded once. Not directly. Just enough to remind me who's really in control. That night, Andrew didn't sleep. He paced, sat, stared at the ceiling. I watched him unravel the version of himself his parents had spent a lifetime constructing: the obedient son, the legacy carrier, the investment they assumed would always pay dividends. And then without telling me, he went to their house. I found out because my phone buzzed while I was making dinner. I'm at my parents'. Need to handle this. Trust me. I won't lie. Fear clawed up my spine. I wondered if this was the moment they finally broke him, if the threat to his livelihood had succeeded where emotional pressure hadn't. I tried not to imagine him sitting at that long dining table again, surrounded, outnumbered. He called me 2 hours later. I confronted them, he said. His voice was steady but tired. All of them. My parents, Victoria. I laid it all out. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to control my life with money. I held my breath. "My father said I was throwing away my legacy," Andrew continued. "My mother cried and called me ungrateful. Victoria said you turned me against my own blood." "And you?" I asked. I told them that unless they apologized not just to me but to you and committed to treating you with basic respect, I was done. Completely. No holidays, no inheritance, no pretending. There was a pause. I could picture it too clearly, his father leaning back, that familiar smirk of superiority. "They laughed," Andrew said. "My dad actually laughed and said I'd come crawling back within a month." Andrew left. He didn't look back. He came home that night with a single box from his childhood bedroom. Old photos, a few books, things his parents would never miss, but that mattered to him. He set it down gently, like it held something fragile. The fallout was swift. A week later, Andrew was officially let go. Position eliminated, the email said, clean, bloodless. But we both knew the truth. I told him we'd be fine. My income could carry us for a while. I meant it. But Andrew refused to be idle. Within days, he was networking freelancing, proving mostly to himself that he was more than the role his father had tried to strip from him. And then his grandmother stepped in. She called Andrew and asked for the full story, not the curated version, not the polite version, the truth. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she called a family meeting. She made Andrew's father sit there while she told him she was ashamed, that he was behaving exactly like his own mother had, cruel, controlling, obsessed with appearances. When he tried to justify it, she cut him off. "I married a man with nothing but character," she said, "and he treated me like a queen every day of his life. That matters more than any bank account." A week later, she changed her will. She told the entire family openly that her house, the one everyone assumed would go to Andrew's father, was now going to Andrew. Not because of money, but because of principle, because actions have consequences. Andrew's father called screaming, accused us of manipulation, of theft, of betrayal. Andrew listened, then said calmly, "You taught me to stand by my values. I'm just finally doing it." And for the first time in his life, he hung up first. The strangest thing about fallout is how quickly it becomes background noise once the ground stops shaking. In the weeks after Andrew lost his job, there was no dramatic collapse, no desperate scrambling, no panic-fueled regret. There was just adjustment, quiet mornings, long conversations over coffee about what mattered and what didn't. Andrew picked up freelance consulting work faster than either of us expected, piecing together projects through old contacts who cared more about his competence than his last name. Within a month, he was earning almost as much as before, only this time without invisible strings attached. His family, on the other hand, unraveled. His father called once more after the will. Change voice sharp with rage, accusing Andrew of manipulating an elderly woman, of stealing a birthright that had never technically been his. Andrew listened without interrupting. Then he said something that still echoes in my mind. "I didn't ask her to do anything. She made her own choice, just like I did." That was the end of it. His father hasn't called since. Victoria showed up at our door one afternoon while I was out. Andrew told me later. She looked smaller than he remembered, less certain. "Are you happy now?" she asked him. "You destroyed this family." Andrew didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just told her the truth. "Your family was already broken. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." She didn't have a response. She left without another word. Andrew's mother sent one text weeks later. "Thinking of you. No apology. No accountability." Andrew didn't reply. What surprised me most was the grief. Not for what we lost, but for what never really existed. Some nights, Andrew would go quiet, staring at nothing. And I knew he was remembering holidays that used to feel warm, parents who once felt safe, a sister who taught him how to ride a bike. Losing the illusion hurt more than losing the people themselves. His grandmother became our anchor. She insisted we come for dinner every Sunday, fed us until we could barely move, and told stories about her late husband that made Andrew laugh until his eyes watered. She never spoke badly about her son. She didn't need to. Her actions said everything. 2 months after everything imploded, Andrew landed a full-time position with a company that had no ties to his family. Better pay, better culture. When he negotiated his salary up $15,000 from their original offer, he came home grinning like he'd won something bigger than money. We weren't living a fairy tale. There were scars. There were quiet moments of sadness. But there was also peace. One afternoon, almost absent-mindedly, we wandered into a jewelry store. "Just looking," Andrew said. "Just curious." I tried on a ring and felt his hand tighten around mine as he watched me smile at my reflection. No proposal, no pressure, just a shared understanding of where we were headed. His family tried to decide his future for him, tried to buy obedience, tried to scare him back into place. Instead, he chose a life built on mutual respect, honesty, and love without conditions. They have to live with the empty chairs at holidays now, with the silence, with the knowledge that control cost them their son. And us, we're building something real quietly, deliberately, and entirely on our own terms.